I can't believe I'm saying this. Godzilla Minus One is the best movie of 2023, and I'll hear arguments about contenders, but it's my favorite movie of the year. As a lifelong Godzilla fan, the worldwide reception to this movie has made a cynical man happy. The movie continues to prove that the creature, the icon, is one of the most versatile characters in cinema history. The film itself is thoughtful, led by fully formed, three-dimensional characters with actual arcs, motivations, and goals played by terrific actors. It's a film made by people who clearly revere the Godzilla IP and have lovingly crafted a film that doesn't just do justice to the character, but for filmmaking in general. What its production company ToHo has achieved with the little they had to work with is a testament to the craftsmanship and dedication of passionate filmmakers. The visuals are stunning, and it's unbelievable that they were able to pull this off with the budget they did, which, according to the director, was even lower than the reported $15 million USD. ToHo looked at the $155 million budget of the American version of Godzilla vs. Kong and said,
"Go fuck yourself."
Movies have generally been stuck in a state of bloated budgets paired with shoddy CGI and terrible scripts. The box office receipts for Hollywood's shitfests show audiences are growing tired of the shtick and want to get out of the mud. While Godzilla Minus One is the diuretic to a constipated movie experience. With each passing year, we become more and more saturated with content. The amount of money spent to create visually dull and narratively neutered stories is out of control, and it's leaving companies hitting the panic button as profits drop, customers leave or stay away dissatisfied, and everyone loses. I enjoy tearing apart bad movies to get some sort of entertainment out of them. In the current year, finding something awful to mock is easy. Finding something you don't just like, but something you're enamored with and want to recommend is rare in the current pop culture climate. Yes, I can find indie films to recommend, but rare are those larger-than-life movies that have heart and a purposeful story to tell. Something that completes the hat trick and doesn't miss any part of the filmmaking process. Minus One is all that, with VFX that rival Hollywood blockbusters possessing 16 times the budget, with its own $15 million figure closer to an independent film's budget by Western standards. The movie's reception and performance at the box office could mean something positive for Hollywood, something they've desperately needed lately, and that positive would come in the form of a lesson. Make good movies people want to see for less money. Spending less means you can take more risks and invest more on story and innovation. You know, what made cinema so special in the first place?
You talking to me?
Now, if you don't want your skin to look like Godzilla's, I would advise you to pick up some razors from Harry's. Harry's blades are made in their own factory in Germany, where they've been making blades for over a century. Besides the fact that I can't grow a real beard, the biggest problem with it has and always will be how expensive even decent blades are. And Harry's has always been a brand that's been associated with quality and affordability. I feel like Harry's is a brand everyone knows or is aware of at this point. If you haven't tried them and maybe you're worried it's just really nice marketing and packaging, it's not. They offer the highest quality blades possible at the lowest markup possible. Other blades are more expensive because they can be, not because they need to be. Harry's offers everything you'll need at a factory direct price, allowing them to keep their incredible quality while keeping prices affordable, at a time when saving money is more important than ever. If you click the link below, you'll receive Harry's trial set for just $5. That's a $13 value for just $5. And thanks to Harry's for sponsoring this video. Speaking of story, much like any good Godzilla origin tale, this one involves World War II, as we follow a man by the name of Koichi Shikishima, a kamikaze pilot who makes the last-second decision to live, pretending his plane was malfunctioning. That evening, a creature known as Godzilla approaches the base where Koichi is hunkering down. His superiors tell him to fire at the creature from his plane to kill it, but Koichi freezes as Godzilla tears through the crowd of panicked soldiers, leaving only him and another man standing by mourning. By the time Koichi returns home the following year, he's found that his family's been killed in the bombing of Tokyo, and a woman named Noriko, in possession of a child who had also lost her parents, finds her way into Koichi's home, who he reluctantly decides to help. With a new sense of purpose, Koichi takes an ocean mine-sweeping job. Meanwhile, the US is performing nuclear tests near Bikini Atoll, and guess who's hanging out there? The nuclear tests turn Godzilla closer to the one we know and love. He might have been a menace before, but now he's a fucking terror. Standing taller than most skyscrapers and apparently indestructible, showcasing regenerative abilities. Turns out Koichi and his crew, known as Doc and the Kid, are actually on a secret mission. See, the Japanese government already knew about Godzilla, so they've sent these three to do something about it. Hijinks ensue as only Godzilla can do, causing untold destruction as he steps ashore. He obliterates tens of thousands of buildings and goes full Green Goblin when he starts literally vaporizing people.
Ow!
I'm not going to spoil the rest of the story because I highly recommend you go see it, but there's enough detail given to discuss all the important elements, starting with the characters. Yes, I know how everyone normally feels about human characters in a Godzilla movie.
I don't give a fuck.
Fair enough.
Don't give a fuck.
I can honestly say, as an actual fan of the franchise, I've rarely become invested in any human character in any of the previous movies. Not that they're all of equal quality or even intended to have likable people in them, but with 30 plus films under your belt, you'd think I'd give a shit about somebody. Maybe it's just me.
No, Johnny, these men are nihilists. There's nothing to be afraid of.
All of that's to say, I was so invested in the characters in Godzilla Minus One that Godzilla even appearing on screen was just a bonus. Movies with heavy focus on CGI creatures require either a great performance if the character is human-like Thanos for example, or if it's a figure like Godzilla, you need to be actively rooting for your heroes to make the audience feel the desired fear and anxiety something like Godzilla would actually bring to an unsuspecting city. Otherwise, you get the Legendary Studios Hollywood Godzilla films, where it was cool to finally see Godzilla in expensive-looking CGI glory, but all of those movies are hollow at best because they never get the audience involved with their cardboard cartoon human characters. They are afterthoughts, they're treated like such, and so those movies, much like the Transformers movies or any other CGI Aladdin blockbusters, are aesthetically pleasing but emotionally empty. It's junk food for the brain. Minus One showcases popcorn flick storytelling at its best. It's a simple tale, but its characters and its story are layered. The way Koichi is written spits in the face of the Los Angeles-style script. The movie exudes confidence because it trusted that the audience would be along for the ride. What I mean is that Hollywood now tends to self-insert. A character has to be relatable in some tangible yet completely shallow way. Koichi's plight isn't something anyone today in Western society would understand. He's a shamed kamikaze pilot, burdened with grief and a sense of duty. But we quickly empathize with him because, like all good stories, its themes are human and therefore universally felt no matter who's watching it. Koichi and his surrogate family are people who are lost, who simply want connection, protection, and love. He's also a man harboring unbelievable guilt. Shame and that sense of duty is a burden. I've seen this film twice now, and I just come away feeling like the script was tight and competent, and I mean that as an extreme compliment. There were satisfying payoffs to setups in the movie. Each character got their due, and there are a couple of moments that were telegraphed, but they were earned. The movie wants you to want those moments, and you absolutely do. Even the way the script got around why the US or Russia couldn't intervene was reasonable. This needed to be a smaller scaled giant movie, if that makes sense, and Godzilla is intended to be Japan's problem to solve. Godzilla himself is much more of a living, breathing character now than he might have ever been on screen, and that includes the American versions. ToHo has managed to bring Godzilla to life in a few shots that are undeniable. They're superior to many shots you see in Hollywood productions. Godzilla's movements in the ocean look fucking incredible, and when he comes to land, the creature moves slowly, methodically, purposefully. He's the living embodiment of mankind's fears. The slow, methodical walk exudes anxiety. It makes this creature seem inevitable. There's one scene in particular that's hinted at in the trailers that was incredibly tense in the theater and was reminiscent of the tension in Jaws when the shark begins chasing the boat. Everything about this scene was brilliant. The editing and pace is key to the anxiety they wanted the audience to feel, and you have to have some stakes in the characters he's chasing. Very rarely does the film's ambition get ahead of itself. The filmmakers were ballsy in some moments with the visual effects that don't quite hit the mark. I cannot stress enough how beautiful this movie looks. The color grading is gorgeous and the cinematography rivals any Hollywood production. The cast is filled with new and veteran actors of Japanese cinema, starting with Ryunosuke Kamaki, who's 30 years old but has screen credits dating back to 2 years old in baby commercials. His acting abilities amplify what the script's already beautifully laid out for an arc. Oichi's often reserved, and the actor sells us with his body language and facial expressions. He embodies someone who is constantly questioning and blaming himself, a man who feels like his inaction has consistently led to others getting hurt, and the guilt is compounding. Newcomer Minami Hamabi plays Oichi's partner Noriko and is great in her role, and has the most devastating, emotionally powerful scene in the movie. There are also two actors that stand out outside of the leads. The first is Munetake Aoki as Mr. Tachibana, the lone man who lived through Godzilla's attack on the emergency base, and who blames it entirely on Oichi's inaction, and the film makes sure he gets a complete arc as well. The second is Hidetaka Yoshioka as the Doc. Hidetaka is a seasoned veteran and a two-time Japanese Academy Award for Best Actor winner. He plays the more typical Godzilla film role of scientist, but he has his own fresh spin on it. You can feel the weight he's bearing as he's concocting a way to defeat the monster, because the consequences of it failing will be dire. And you can see just from the trailers that the film is visually striking, but I was genuinely pleased by the sound design and how much attention was put into it. When Godzilla is swimming through the water or stepping onto land, you hear and feel every moment. I didn't get a chance to see it in IMAX, and even the sound mix in a standard theater made the seats rumble. The bass levels are used to amplify the stress levels. The scene where Godzilla attacks the wooden boat comes to mind again, because the impact and churning of the water created so much tension. It's another part of filmmaking where they knocked it out of the park. Speaking of that scene, they didn't bring in any music, and it heightened everything because of the shock of the sound effects. It's a brilliant artistic choice to not use music at that moment, but I'd hate to disregard how wonderful the score is. When used in the right context, the original Godzilla theme is still incredibly effective. I also understand the timing of dropping the Godzilla x Kong The New Empire, or however the fuck you say it, the new trailer for that movie, near the release of Godzilla Minus One. It seems to make good marketing sense on the surface to release a trailer hyping up a project within the same intellectual property as the one hitting theaters. Godzilla Minus One hit theaters on December 1st, and the Godzilla Kong sequel trailer landed a couple days later. This originally was planned to be a prequel to the Godzilla vs. Kong movie that was so successful for Warner Brothers back in 2021, when the film seemed like it was going to be a victim of Warner Brothers' terrible decision to release their entire film slate that year, day and date, simultaneously in theaters and on their streaming service HBO Max. Even though the theatrical experience was still up in the air by the end of 2020 when Warner Brothers made that decision, it was obvious this was to mostly help boost their streaming platform. By the tail end of that year, the major studios had invested billions into their own individual streamers, and Warner needed something to boost theirs above everyone else's. The dual launch in theaters and HBO Max hurt a number of releases, or in some cases, masked their poor performances by blaming it on streaming. But Godzilla vs. Kong was a hit in theaters and on Max. For better or worse, the new trailer for the sequel promises more of the same. That means more of the beautiful but weightless CGI that'll be the centerpiece of the film, and underwritten stand-ins for human characters. At that point, the Hollywood version of Godzilla's universe will be 5 films deep, and the last film of the franchise looks nothing like the first. 2014's Godzilla was a darker toned film that took itself seriously, and not to its detriment. Its biggest flaw was that the main characters weren't very interesting, and they wasted Bryan Cranston. The negative response to the even more self-serious sequel, King of the Monsters, made the studio go toward a lighter tone with Godzilla vs. Kong, which received some acclaim for being a fun, albeit brainless and forgettable popcorn movie. What the studio took from the negative reception to the darker films were that darker films were bad. Yet the praise for Godzilla Minus One, and the success it's seen in comparison to its budget and overall expenses, suggests maybe people don't care what tone you're going for, they just like good movies. A wild concept. And the film's story is emblematic of its production and the approach to film by ToHo in general. It's simultaneously massive in scope while being a small, simple story. It's easy to follow but has a deeply human core in all its messy complexity and contradictions. The soldiers in the movie feel lost, abandoned, yet burdened with a sense of duty that's never going to be resolved, or so they think. They want to fight for their country but feel betrayed by the regime. They are proud men lost and finding purpose in uniting against Godzilla. Speaking of him, Minus One shows yet again why he's one of the most versatile movie characters ever created. The first Godzilla film released in 1954 is an all-time classic and one of my favorite movies ever made, with Godzilla the character reflecting the fears and anxieties of Japan at the time, nearly a decade after the conclusion of World War II. On the surface, it was a well-crafted film, but it was so much more than just a monster movie. It illustrated the consequences and impact humanity can have on the planet, with Godzilla essentially embodying nature, exacting its revenge. In my opinion, this is and always will be the best way Godzilla's ever been utilized as a character. But there were more than 30 movies to go after that, and those themes weren't necessarily repeated.
Here's Johnny!
And that's where the diversity of Godzilla can be understated. The character has endured because of his versatility. He started as a frightening screen villain and the living embodiment of humanity's fears, to a kid-friendly hero and a childhood icon. Serious or silly, the character and concept of Godzilla can do it all, and why he's been around for nearly 80 years. Over that span, there have been 4 different eras of Godzilla film and media, each with its own identity. The 1954 film kicked off the Showa era that ended in 1975, and so began his transition from terrifying villain and threat to Earth to a hero and the savior of the planet. New monsters would begin showing up as early as the first sequel. Now, nearly 8 decades later, there are over 30 kaiju in ToHo's Godzillaverse, with some starring in their own films like Mothra and Rodan. As a fan, I can appreciate all these eras for what they are and what they represent. Godzilla is a character that can be reinvented, reinterpreted, and used as a tool for whatever the writers need him to be. After the Showa era ended in 1975, the franchise lay dormant until the 80s when the King of the Monsters was brought back for what's known as the Heisei era. He returned to form, so to speak, with a darker, more serious tone, and leaving behind the kid-friendly hero, although he'd gain anti-hero status by the end of the era. After this, ToHo decided to risk licensing out the character to Hollywood, and the results were, well,
Go
100%,
fuck yourself.
100%.
You're a piece of shit.
That's how I feel.
and that's how we got the next era of ToHo Godzilla films, known as the Millennium Era. This one was pretty unique because it was the first era to have each film represent a different interpretation of the character and his mythos, culminating in the wham bam fan pleaser known as Godzilla Final Wars. If some of the older films seem like kids just smashing their toys together, this was if those kids grew up and given a budget to keep going. The franchise is currently in the Reiwa era, and its film output is considerably lower than the previous ones. Aside from the Netflix animated Godzilla projects, the Reiwa era has seen 2 theatrical releases. Shin Godzilla in 2015 and -1 this year. Shin Godzilla would go on to win the Japanese equivalent of a Best Picture Oscar and was lauded for its themes critical of government bureaucracy during times of global crisis. They've licensed Godzilla out to Hollywood and produced animated features, but ToHo has taken a much more conservative and thoughtful approach to their theatrical releases and how they use the character. If Shin Godzilla carried modern, broader themes, Godzilla -1 tries to and succeeds at doing the opposite, because it's a much smaller personal story that follows a single character as the clear lead instead of an ensemble that's normally required for a story of a global threat. It's a different approach to a story that requires great character writing, because the success of the movie hinges on the connection between the audience and the people on screen. How they're going to deal with Godzilla becomes surprisingly secondary to what's going to happen to Koichi, Akiko, Doc. Will they make it through this? And even if they do, will Koichi be able to live with himself? It's wild to care so much about characters in a Godzilla movie, but it stands out more now because it's rare to have it in a movie on the big screen in general, unless you're in the indie market. You simply don't get this in an IMAX level popcorn flick very often. And in the center of it all is the character of Godzilla himself. Whether he's a force of nature and a catalyst for change in the lives of our lead characters, or he's the actual focus of the film as a hero or villain, whether it's a rubber suit or fully realized CGI, Godzilla's an incredibly versatile character, and it's proven to be true time and again. Just how goddamn good -1 is really shines a light on the poor quality of the Hollywood version of Godzilla. The MonsterVerse has its own charms in a way. It truly is the Americanized version of the schlocky, rubber suit, more kid-friendly creature. Legendary Studios decided to go the more anti-hero route with Godzilla instead of making him a full-fledged villain or an indifferent force of nature. While the first movie in the franchise in 2014 had a dark tone, and I mean that in every sense, you couldn't see anything in that fucking movie.
I'm not blind 23 hours a day or 22 hours a day. I'm blind the whole goddamn time. I'm blind!
They moved forward with a lighter, broader appeal to the franchise and the character by the time they got to the slugfest of Godzilla vs. Kong. Compare the lead characters in Godzilla -1 to whoever the fuck was in that movie. Yeah, who were the characters in Godzilla vs. Kong? The girl from Stranger Things, right? And the brother of the guy who played it. And if we're comparing the quality of -1 to Hollywood films, you can't get better than Godzilla's direct American Hollywood counterpart. The American-made monster boxing match was fun during the brawls, but all the movie was good for was spectacle. It's the epitome of summer disposable trash, and I say that as a fan of the franchise. Contrast the American version with ToHo's, and you couldn't find 2 franchises that are literally the same thing be more opposite from one another. I'm curious what kind of impact -1 will have on the American MonsterVerse moving forward. I wonder if fans will scoff at the assembly line nature of the next Godzilla vs. Kong film coming out next year, now that we have a brand new example of how great a Godzilla movie can be. The budget of this film reflects the dedication and passion of its filmmakers. The word embarrassing has been thrown around quite a bit in relation to how Hollywood studios should be feeling, but it's true. Godzilla -1 won't make hundreds of millions at the box office. It'll probably cruise past 100 million in the end. So we're not talking about an Avengers-level cultural shift or anything, but the overwhelming praise from fans and the continued expansion of the film through North America should prove to studios that you can do more with less, that smaller films can be profitable, that a big-budget movie makes people more risk-averse, and that makes movies bland, boring, predictable, granola assembly line trash. Godzilla is an IP that's well over 80 years old and can be reimagined and reinterpreted seemingly endlessly. So when you hear about superhero fatigue or anything related to the overuse of IPs, while there's merit there, I would suggest maybe it really is bad movie fatigue, and it can be applied to anything. You can get granular, but it makes sense to be fatigued with an entire genre if each thing has been mid to awful. And there stands the king of the monsters, showing how an intellectual property can endure with a passionate and caring crew behind it, who care about producing the best quality work possible. The end result is the best movie of the year. If you can, please support great films and see Godzilla -1 while it's still in theaters. GG's.